I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Do y'all have any faith, bruh?
Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. It is finished.
What's up, Raptor Baits? Welcome to the Skyler Fiction Show, where Christian apologetics comes to die. Man, has it been a crazy day in the Skyler Fiction world. Many of you probably actually this afternoon watched a video I was doing about Daniel Ray. Daniel Ray has had some disagreements with me on Twitter, and I told him that I would go ahead and review a portion of the video that him and I had in discussion before, because he claims that I was asking him questions that weren't yes or no questions, and I think clearly from the video you can see that they were very easily answered yes or no, but the more important was the constant dodging. Anyways, we played the video. I made a little thumbnail like I always do, just like with this gentleman here tonight, Converse Contender. We have a fun little thumbnail. I photoshopped some stuff. I took, used one of his images, and I put a whole new background with a dodgeball and space behind him. And I find out that he's threatening now to flag my channel for using his image, which I don't know how that's going to work, because this definitely falls under fair use. But it has been interesting to say the least. He's now blocked us and keeps threatening me over and over again. Sometimes unblocking me and then re-threatening me. We'll see what happens. But Dr. Josh, how are you this evening? You doing okay?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. A little tired, but
A little tired.
How are you?
Life's not bad. Been keeping busy. What else I got? Tomorrow we have, I can't think of the guy's name, Knowledge something. We have another guest tomorrow, so check it out. I'm not even going to tell you there's something else that I got myself into that will be on January, I think, 2nd.
Oh, right.
We're not going to even go into that right now, because I don't have the courage to tell you and have to admit what I'm going to be doing on January 2nd on another channel.
I wouldn't know, except it popped up on the joint calendar, so...
So we'll talk about that later. And there's some stipulations involved now. So
I'm sure they'll be held too.
It's gonna have to be in the way that we're formatting it. I'm open. At least till we get the cross-examination. Anyways, we're not gonna talk about that tonight. What we're gonna talk about is our wonderful guest that's here on the show this evening, because we have an awesome guest, Converse Contender. Converse, what's up, my man? Why don't you introduce yourself? Doing good, man. We're glad to have you here. We're going to have you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and you got a couple things to say. Sure. And then I know you'll probably have a couple questions for us. So that's why you're here. Sure. And we'll get this going. So why don't we start there, my man?
All right. So I have, honestly, you would probably know, but about 4 years ago or so, I had a YouTube channel, and mainly I spent time on G+ stuff. And we've had discussions in the past on some of the G-Man versus the World hangouts from way back in the day. And then you and I have had other discussions, just like briefly. I grew up going to church, as a young child with my grandmother. And I always looked up to her, thought she was awesome. And all my friends always thought my grandma was super cool, man. So she's always the sweetest person. And then, so I quit going to church basically because my family wasn't much of a church-going family. I guess we were kind of, if somebody would have asked us, we'd probably say we believed, right? But we didn't really go. So what I did was, growing up, there wasn't much for me at the church. I was a skateboarder, and I grew up playing in punk bands, as I mentioned earlier on the other interview I had. And those are kind of my main things that I did all through my young adolescent days until I was out of high school. And then I fell into some, basic partying, drugs, drinking, whatever, you name it, what college age kids do a lot of times. And
I call it my weekend. But
right, your weekend, exactly. potato. But
Yes.
so what I did from there is I had a son at the age of 23, I believe, and I basically was a single father for about 5 years. I'm about to get married this year, but I kind of started cleaning up my life. And as I was cleaning up my life, I was looking for the truth, you know. So from about, I'd say from about 20 to now to 30s to my early 30s, I've been kind of studying philosophy and theology and linguistics and all these different fields because I'm interested in them. When I was in high school, I had no interest at all, but now I'm, you know, obviously over the last 10 or so years, I've been super interested in all these topics. So, but then I started to, how I became a Christian is I started to kind of look at the person of Jesus. And I thought, man, this guy's really cool. You know, I'm a punk rocker. I'm wearing a mohawk, you know, and then skateboarding around like this whole, you know, your cliche punk guy. And then I see Christ and I start reading about him and I go, this guy's awesome. He's like coming in, kicking over the money changing tables in the temple, like calling people out on being hypocrites in the religions. And then he's saying there's no difference between Jews and Greeks or male and female, slave or free man, like all these principles where I'm like, geez. And then he claims not to know the truth, but he claims I am the truth. That's a strange claim. I've heard a lot of people claim that they know the truth. So I had to take a second look at this guy and go, either, you know, obviously either he may be crazy or he may be the truth. So then I asked myself, where's the most reliable, if God revealed himself to people, what is the most reliable source that could have actually, that God could have actually revealed himself through? And Christ was the answer for me. I mean, I looked through a lot of religions, but obviously at that point, you know, I guess you could say I kind of rooted for Christians in debates from like maybe 22 through about 26 or something like that. And then around 26, 27, you know, I found myself identifying as a Christian. So that's all I'd say about my background and my intro. And then if I could just say a couple of things here about the discussion.
Please.
So we've had discussions in the past, you know, and I'd like to talk about, first of all, the discussion itself. I'm not interested in a defensive debate where we're both just arguing the whole time. Rather, I want clarity. I want to talk about the actual issues. I don't want any dodging or anything like that. And then secondly, on the topic of brevity, I just like to make sure that I can finish all my points and that that I have time, because a lot of times when you're trying to lead to something and you start making points, somebody wants to stop you at that point. If you could just let me finish and develop my point, then you can respond as much time as you want, if that makes sense. And one more thing is I'm what some people call long-winded, but what I would say is I like to develop my points in full. So, you know, just keep that in mind. And I guess what we can start with is, if you want, is the last time I talked to you, you were a deist. So maybe we can start with your change in position. Tell me, what was the first domino, or what was the thing that made you go, hey, there is a God, because all the numinous and different things in the universe, and to the point where you're like, well, no, there's not one.
No, I would say that probably, a bunch of different, you know, it's life. You go through a lot of different changes in your life and thoughts and what you believe. I would say, you know, I was, like I said, you know, I was a Christian for a long time. I actually left the religion. I was agnostic. I actually became a deist when I was on YouTube. I was agnostic when I first started doing Google Hangouts. I kind of started listening to a lot of Alan Watts. So I still dig Alan Watts. He's killer. You guys should check him out. If you don't have to be religious to enjoy him, but he's a good philosopher. He's an Eastern philosopher. And, you know, eventually, just to be truthful, I didn't have any really justified reasons besides feeling better about, now, how do I say this? I didn't have any good reasons to believe what I believed. Right? Sure. It just made me feel better.
And you're fine with that, right?
Yeah, I'm fine. It doesn't, well, I'm fine in the sense of like, what do you mean? Like fine by like?
Oh, I was just asking, like you're fine. Like if somebody, like, for example, there are Christian fideists who say we believe in God, but we don't feel like we have to justify that.
No, as long as they're, I mean, as long as they're not hurting anybody, they're not trying to restrict people's rights, and they're not hurting themselves, I could pretty much not care.
Okay, that's fine. So I guess what we'll do is, since I guess there was nothing really that changed your mind on deism, but I do know that you have on morality, you take the side of subjective morality. That's the case, right? That
is the case. Yep.
Okay. Now,
at least where the evidence leads me right now. I mean, I'm open to there being other moral, different. There's some definitely stronger arguments from like secular types of objective morality, but I think all they're really doing is just picking a standard and going with it, and then calling it objective. Yeah.
So I guess what I want to ask is, and you don't have to worry about Googling this or anything if you're unfamiliar. Just are you familiar with deontological morality or not?
No, I'm not familiar with it. No.
So basically, deontological, it's in normative ethics. It's that something is ethical based on rules rather than consequences. So let's see. I actually have already pulled up the definition here. The normative ethical theory that the morality of an action should be based on whether that action itself is right or wrong under a series of rules, rather than based on the consequences of an action. So you have, like, for example, something might be wrong because, like, if you stepped on somebody's toe, it's wrong because that hurts, for example. That's a consequence.
Sure.
But there may be a rule, like, for example, you shouldn't lie. And maybe a lie doesn't hurt somebody. Maybe it doesn't have a bad consequence, but it's based on a rule rather than a consequence. And I take a more deontological position on morality. So I guess what I'm getting to with all that is, with subjective morality, let me just do an example that might help. So,
well, can I ask, for example, what's who makes the rules in that scenario?
Well, atheists take deontological arguments as well, and there's not a who, there's a what makes the rules.
Well, yeah. What, who, like, well, what, yeah. Like, what? So if we're saying, like, and I'm just really just to understand what this, where this is coming from. So, like, what makes the rules, or who makes the rules, whatever it is, like, that someone would. So, follow.
From the Christian perspective, right? It's God that sets the rules, and that's what makes it. That's what makes it right or wrong, and
it's almost like divine command theory in a sense.
So yeah, so I do subscribe to a version of divine command theory. Sure.
Okay.
So I guess how I would explain it is like this. So let me ask you
please.
Let me ask you an example that I think might clarify a little bit. So take because we always pick galvanized examples, right? So hyperbolic examples. So let's take Hitler and the Nazis. They thought that killing Jews was fine. Now, we know that that's wrong. Okay, so what I would say is
when you say we know that that's wrong, I'm going to have an objection.
I understand.
I'm just stating, I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I just want to.
No, I get it. What I mean by that is, objectively, I know that's wrong, and subjectively, you know that's wrong, right?
Fair enough. Yeah,
okay, so for now, we'll stick with that. So because it doesn't have any bearing on the argument. So
sure.
So let's say that. So your view is basically that human opinion is what decides morality, right? Because it's subjective. So let's say
it also defines what morality is.
Okay.
Morality is defined differently between person to person.
So let's say that Hitler would have won the war, brainwashed everybody in the world, or killed everybody who disagreed with him, and everybody in the world at that point believed that killing Jews was fine. Would that be moral if everybody believed it?
Under whose system?
Under subjective morality. If everybody in the world believed it.
Well, yeah. Well, if morals are subjective, so those individuals who have subjective morality believe that, obviously they're atrocious to me, just to be clear.
Sure.
But if these individuals, like if you had a world full of Nazis who thought it was perfectly moral to kill every ethnic group besides their own, well, yeah, then they would think that it was moral. It would be moral under their system.
Okay, that's all I was asking. I mean, I was just wondering because I thought that's where that leads is subjectivism. It leads to what human perspective is, or what this.
Because I promise I won't say much during this, but
Yeah.
because this got to this point, I've been actually waiting for it to get to this point for some time, and it got there in such a nice way.
Sure.
So now that we've gotten there, like, what do you think of that? Let me say it a different way. I hear people trying to pull that out of Skyler a lot. Pull is not the right word, but like pull is not the right word, but try to corner him, try to trap him. Not that that's what you were doing, but
Okay, I was about to say, is that a
yeah,
trap,
no,
or
it's
is this
definitely
a
not what
question?
you were doing. But I hear people doing that a lot, like it's going to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we've gotten there, and we would say, and I think it was actually stated really clearly here between the two of you, that if morality is subjective and it's determined by the individual, and all of the individuals that are determining it determine that it is moral, then to those individuals in that system, it will be moral to them, right? Do you think that has any? Does that? I mean, I feel like people want to get there so often in a debate with Skyler, and then somehow turn that on him. But I don't understand how that turns on him.
Well, I didn't say it turned on him.
No, but I mean, do you?
No,
so I'm not suggesting that you do.
Sure.
But do you?
Maybe
I'm
from
asking,
a Christian perspective.
Yeah, I'm asking you as from a Christian perspective. Do you see that as like what he just said as a bad thing? Like, does it make it to you? Does it make him look bad? I guess because I've tried to figure out. You know what it's like. Then I promise I'll sit back again. It's like this thing that I hear all the time that ancient Near Eastern and Old Testament laws were not prescriptive, right? They weren't normative. And I hear that all the time. Oh, well, these laws in Exodus 21, they're not normative laws. They're not prescriptive laws. And then it sort of ends. It sort of peters out like that's a point that somebody's made. And I always walk away going, yeah. So where do you think they're going with that? Like, not with the law thing, sorry, but in the same way, where do you think people are going when they try to get Skyler to say, well, would it be right if there were only Nazis left?
So there are a few things I believe that accomplishes. Number one, it says that your view of morality is merely an opinion. It's merely a taste. Like, for example, if I were to say, I don't like broccoli, but somebody else were to say, well, I do. In the same way, you're like, well, I don't like gassing Jews. And somebody else is like, well, I do. It's like, well, if it's just a taste, that kind of trivializes what morality is. But then secondly...
All right, well, hold on. Sorry. Because you're using some words here that I'm going to take issue with. The use of the word merely in that sentence. Do
you think preferences on food are merely, or what do you take issue with that word merely?
Yeah, because I think it's implying some things. So even as you say that, like your understanding, it sounds like what you're saying is, Skyler, your understanding of morality is merely it's insignificant is how it's coming across. Yeah.
So even if I extracted the word merely, if I say I don't like broccoli and somebody else says, well, I do, you're saying that morality is the same way. I don't like killing Jews, and somebody else says, well, I do, and you're just like, you have a beer and you're just like, oh, okay.
Do you think that anybody would,
you know what I mean?
Converse, I mean, do you think anybody would ever argue anything like that?
What do you?
I mean, do you think that Skyler would toast somebody? I mean, I feel like that's a weird comparison that you've made there. Do you think it's a weird comparison?
No, what I'm saying is, I know Skyler wouldn't do that, but what I'm saying is that the fact that he wouldn't do that kind of implies that he knows that they're wrong. Now, he can say, to be intellectually honest, no, I just believe in subjective morals. But the fact that he wouldn't just toast somebody and go, oh, you don't like broccoli, or the fact that he would do that shows that there's something deeper to his belief than just, oh, that's your preference? Oh, okay.
Well, I think that's part of the problem in the framing, right? It's obviously, it's okay. When you love somebody, that's an emotion, right? My love for my wife isn't just, we wouldn't say that's just merely love, right? Like
Well,
we would
some
say
people would.
we're talking to me, and I think generally people wouldn't say that. I think that yes,
Okay.
you can find a small amount of people for almost
Well, like
anything.
a lot of atheists would say, no, it's just
Hold
a
on,
biochemical
let me
reaction.
finish my thought
Yeah,
real
go ahead.
quick.
Go ahead.
Let
Sorry.
me get this go through here.
Sorry.
So here's the thing. So I think that what we're doing here is part of it's like we detach also all the other things. Yes, it's an opinion, right? Morality is an opinion, but it's rooted in emotions, empathy, a lot of other things that are built in there.
And I think
that's what gives it the stronger values.
A lot of logic, right? A lot of
Yes.
considerations of cause and effect. I mean, I'm not a philosopher in any way, but I don't think a preference of broccoli, or because I don't even know the broccoli, because broccoli could have some consequences, right? I mean, people could feel very strongly like, no, you need to eat your broccoli. Whereas maybe it sounds like what you're trying to say is more like, I like strawberry ice cream, and the other person says, no, I like mint ice cream. I don't know that there's no, from a consequentialist standpoint.
Let's stick with the one that I gave, though, because you're right. That could have a consequential view.
Right. Well, I'm gonna say the ice cream one, and the reason that I'm gonna say it, I think, is that the way that it's coming across is this merely preferential thing. And I think with the broccoli example, not that, I mean, we're talking levels now, right?
Sure.
Perhaps difference in scale, but an argument obviously could and often is made that these types of foods one should eat, more than these other types of foods. And there's logic, there's thought that goes into that, there's consequences. And so when I think of something like morality, even though Skyler would argue that people develop their own moral systems, and that ultimately that's subjective and based on their opinion, that it's not based on whimsical opinion, right? Or I like the taste of that. That very often, I would say, it's based off of a cognitive process that says I'm thinking through the effects that this has on me, on those around me, and so I feel like it's different.
Yeah, but there's a lot of There's a lot of cases where it wouldn't yield a positive result, but it's like if something yielded a positive result that we typically think as moral, so that would be a problem for that view. Because you said, a lot of things go into it, like we logically look at things like if they're beneficial or something like that. There are a lot of things that are beneficial that are immoral, for example.
Under whose system? But that's the thing, is now you're talking about what system?
Yeah.
Like,
well, let me just ask you an example. So utilitarians will say something like, look, if we kill 3 million people, it will save hundreds of millions, if not hundreds of billions. And then they would point out that, hey, look, you might say it's, it's beneficial. We're using logic. We're using reason. We're using all these tools that you said you're getting your subjective. So that's what I'm saying, is at some point you have to ask yourself, all right, well, how do we know?
Yeah, I mean, welcome.
Like, is it just?
Sorry,
you're not knowing anything.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
My response is like,
welcome to the conversation.
Life. No, I mean, like, welcome to life. Like, how do we know? I mean, that's why there are debates. I mean, but I mean, I think that's what Skyler's saying. And I said I was going to sit back, and I'm doing anything but sitting back.
All right.
I'm sorry. No I will actually mute myself if I need to.
I don't mind.
No, I appreciate it.
But it's not about knowing something too. It's not like we're not knowing like the way when someone frames it like that, it's like, what's knowing what is right or wrong? There aren't moral facts to know. It's opinions. Okay. It's based on, and then also the other thing I'm sorry, Josh, I cut you off, but I just got to say this real quick. So the other thing is too, is like, yes, an aspect of it's logic, but right then when you get to your example, it's like, well, also I have empathy and emotion, and I don't want to kill people. Like, it may be logical, like in some weird way. It's like, they use the example, you have the trolley collar problem is basically this, right? Like, when do you pull the lever? Like, there comes a point where, like, emotionally, you're going to be like, no, that's not what I want to do. I don't feel good doing that. Emotionally, that makes me feel sick. I don't want to hurt people, right? It's like killing one person so the doctor can take all their organs and give it to save 10 lives, right? Well, I don't want to hurt that person. So, like, it's not just one thing; it's a multiple things that encompass a subjective.
So I was just responding to what Josh said about, well, we don't just whimsically believe. We use reasons logically. We look for things to kind of back our view. And so I was just responding to that. So now you're saying, but there are more reasons than just that, the logical reasons. But obviously, I mean, like, that's what I was saying is, ultimately, those are all subjective reasons, and you agree with that. You're not necessarily.
But that's by definition. That's what subjective morality is.
But I think just that's
subjective reasons. Yeah.
But that's my point, I guess, is what you're saying, is that it's not just a whimsical preference, right? It's there's more to this than I like the taste of.
Yeah, it's not picking your
cherry
favorite
as
ice cream.
opposed to grape or whatever.
Yeah.
So you know what might be fun to do, and it may be interesting, is this may be interesting for the moral argument, is how about if we switch places? And I ask, and I'm the atheist and you're the Christian, because you've interacted with a lot of Christians. I'm sure you know the answers to a lot of the questions, right? So if I were to ask you as an atheist, hey, Skyler, with your what's wrong with your God? Look what he did to the Canaanites, and look what he did to the Amalekites. What's wrong with your God?
I do think it's wrong.
I can do it if you.
Yeah,
if Skyler doesn't want to do it, that's up to him.
Sorry.
Sly little thing there about.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I'm not...
No, I want to do it. That's fine. I'll do it. I don't know. You want me to argue the Christian position? Now, the problem is there's 100 different Christian positions on this.
Sure.
Right? So, would you want me to?
Do you have a best argument that you've heard so far?
There's not. I don't. That's what I'm saying. There's just different arguments, right?
Okay.
If I were to say if I were a Calvinist position, it's really odd, right? And then, like, you have divine command theory. You just have it's part of God's nature, right? So, like, that's the problem. There is no good reason by looking at the Bible why God does the thing He does in the Scriptures. That's why I don't see how anybody could even argue for them and say that it would be actually good in any of those senses.
Okay. So I guess what we can do now is just, hey, I asked you some questions. If you want to pick up on that and kind of reverse it on me, I would be willing to answer some of those questions.
Well, I would just say one of the things I did hear you say, and I think it's really more, and I wanted to ask you about it before I asked you in the chat when we were talking during your show, was about, you think that I think you believe that I straw man the Bible. Like, I don't actually go into what Christians actually believe. And maybe we could talk about some of those examples where you think I'm getting the Bible wrong, or you think I'm putting Christians in that spot. That might be
I know that you have on Christians and you just take their perspectives, which I get what you're saying. Like I have on Christians and they tell me what they believe, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I get your point. The only thing I would say is that, the thing about these conversations is when people are confronted with beliefs that contradict their beliefs, they tend to cling tighter to their beliefs. And I mean on both sides. So, for example, if I were to give you an argument, which I did a long time ago for these, for example, when we went to the Amalekites and the Canaanites and such, I gave you an argument that I think still stands. And you changed your argument immediately. And maybe we'll get into that way we can clarify, but you immediately goes, well, that makes it worse. And then you went to something different and went, well, now let's go to this because that makes it worse for this part of the Bible. So maybe if you want to jump into some of that, and we can.
That makes sense.
Clarify.
Well, think about something, right? Like, so if I'm having a discussion with somebody and what you've done is now caused more problems, sure, I'm going to point that out. Right. And we're going to move to something different, but it's a different problem now. You may have solved the first problem, but what you've done is created a different problem, which is fine. Then we've at least put that first problem to rest. Like, now that makes sense. Like, the issue is now resolved. But because you've resolved this issue, you've now created other problems. I think giving an example, I don't remember that conversation, how you explained.
So then we went to the answer to that next question. Mm-hmm. And I think you kind of just dismissed it hand-wavingly. Now, I'm not saying
tell me what it is, dude. You got to tell me what it is. I have no clue what you're referencing or what you're talking about. This is kind of open, and I have.
Yeah, I get it. So I guess if you want, what I can do is let's just take up the specific issues and we'll progress back through.
Okay,
And see what
that
we
sounds
get.
good.
So let's take, for example, the Canaanites and the Amalekites and the killings, right? That's going on.
All right.
Now,
Perfect.
if you would, could I have like 5 to 6 minutes just to lay out my case, and then you can respond for as long as you want? Is that all right?
Sure. Let's stick to one group. Let's stick to the Amalekites. That's going to be easier because then we have one group of people. Because there's different reasons God killed, at least to the text, why these things were. If you're just going to talk about genocide in general, you can do that. But I'd like to stick to one story in the Bible. That way, we don't get mixed up with a bunch of different stories and we lose place.
Okay, so I would kind of argue that both are the same, and God ordered those for the same reasons. So if I could, I mean, I'll just give you like the argument, but I want to start by showing you the severity of the issue in case you haven't studied into this. So if you would, like I say, if I could have maybe 5 or 6 minutes.
All right, dude,
just to
go ahead,
my
man. Go ahead,
All
my
right.
brother. Just get to it.
I mean, I don't want to. Okay.
No, I know. I'm telling you.
So it seems to me that you and Josh, from what I've heard you guys say, is that you believe that humans are mostly good, but they have a kind of like an evil intention sometimes, or they have bad thoughts, or you know, do you guys still like believe that humans are most good for the most part?
Are you asking based on the biblical text? Or are you asking?
No, I just mean in your worldview. Like, do you guys think that? Yeah, you do. Okay.
Now, I would say I define good. Yeah, most of the time people are pretty good.
All right. So what I want to do, and I know that this may, for some people, this may be like, you know, I don't mean to do this to pull on heartstrings, but I just want to lay out some of the human like history that we can compare and contrast today to the Bible. So, for example, of course, there were 6 million Ukrainians that were starved to death by the Soviet Union, right? There were over 6 million people gassed to death by Hitler. In China, 26 to 30 million people, counter-revolutionaries, were killed. In Japan in 1937, the Japanese army raped and murdered over 300,000. But it's like Irish Chang put in his book, The Rape of Nanking, it wasn't just the killing or the amount of people. It was the cruel manner in which these deaths happened. They would delimb people, cut off women's breasts. They would nail women alive to walls. They would make fathers.
We get it. I mean, you don't have to go through I'm not trying to interrupt you, man, but honestly, this is, I went through this whole thing. Yes, this is what IP actually did on his video, where he just listed all the atrocities. Yeah, under our worldview, things that we would find immoral, people have done atrocious things. Okay.
Okay, so I know it's not easy to hear some things like that. Like it's
not about needing. I know it's awful to hear these things, but it's not relevant in a sense to what our arguments are against the stories.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people haven't heard some of the worst things that
people don't know about the Nazis at this point. That's
not even close to the worst things.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
Listen,
everybody out there, I want you to think of the worst possible thing you can ever imagine. Right? A human being's probably done it. All right. Okay. They've all thought of the worst possibly human thing. All right. Let's go to the next. The reason I mean, this isn't going to actually help the argument at all when we get to this thing. And that's not I acknowledge that these cultures were awful and terrible cultures. My argument.
What cultures?
Well, that's what I said. I wanted to state a specific culture, like let's say that's what
I was going through.
We should stick to the Amalekites more because you're using it. You're going to end up trying to justifying what happened in the Bible. Right. And then you're going to talk about how bad the human condition is and how awful things are. And then God's basically justified in some way. Right. So, I mean, that sounds like where you're going. Maybe you're not, but it sounds like you're making some kind of justification why it was okay.
So first I was just going to go through pretty much all the cultures of the world, all the different nationalities of the world, and show that they not only have the biggest regimes and all the cultures done some of the worst things we've ever even thought of, but that it may be only that now that we have implied this moral system on the world that people aren't doing these things still. And so there's a term, anthropodicy, which means to justify the human condition as being mostly good. And I think humans make a mistake with that. So, but now I guess we'll skip some of that. And I had some studies, but we'll just skip the studies and everything.
Well,
and just go straight to the text.
What standard of good are you appealing to when you're using these studies?
Well, for you, for example, I would just give you the citation. I mean, I would just give you the situation and then let you decide whether.
Well, no, but what's the study? But what's the study using as a standard of good?
What is the study that I'm using as a standard of good?
If you're reading a peer-reviewed article, you're doing a study. What is it in their methodology? What is it that they're saying is the standard? So these are good things. These are bad things. What is their standard?
Harming other humans is what they're using. That wouldn't necessarily be my highest standard, but I figured you guys would relate to that and probably think that was wrong.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, not for harming human beings for certain. But I just.
But we'll skip the studies. So we'll skip the studies though. Like, I mean, I just that's. We'll skip past it. So
I mean, if for no other reason, hey, I mean, I would say at least some of this is for me.
Sure.
I'm not. I don't like hearing things like this. It makes me squeamish. I'm fine saying that. So I mean, you guys, if you guys decide you want to talk about it, that's fine. I'll go get a cup of coffee or something. It's cool.
No, we'll skip it. So
I think we can all acknowledge bad things happen.
So let's go straight to the text. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, and I've mentioned some of this to you before. So it's. Now, last time I mentioned this to you, you kind of admitted that that you weren't familiar. So I want to, but now I know you are familiar with this. So I just want to kind of I want to get this back out with you. So in Numbers chapter 13, verse 17, it says, "When Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan," right? So Moses sending spies to look at the land of Canaan. Is this the one
where all the women go? They go and capture all the women?
No. Okay. So he says, whenever they came to Moses and Aaron, they said, when you sent us into the land, we went to the land you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live there in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of the Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill countries, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. Okay, so, and then in 33, there we also saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, are the part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sights, and so we were in their sights. So this mentions directly the Amalekites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and all of these groups that they went into to destroy utterly. Then it links them to the Anakim, which came from the Nephilim. And it says right in the text on 33, we saw the sons of Anak, which are part of the Nephilim. And I will argue that in Deuteronomy chapter 3, I believe it is, whenever they go to kill Og of Bashan, they kill Og, and then they brag about the size of his bed frame being so big. And then they say, after they killed Og, the king of Bashan, that was the last of the Raphaim, which is related as well.
Can I
so,
just
go ahead?
Sorry, I don't want to. I just kind of want to. So, are you an inerrantist? Are you looking at this as this is history from a biblical inerrantist standpoint?
I'm looking at this as if you want to be consistent with the scriptures, and you ask, why did God wipe out these people?
Yeah, right.
Instead of
so I'm asking from an inerrantist standpoint because I actually think there's a lot of different ways you can stay consistent with the scripture, and inerrancy isn't always one of them. So, but that's the position that you're espousing here when you do. So when you if the text says
I don't think
it
matters. I mean, I don't think that, because there's
kind of does how you view scripture.
I could come to it as a non-believer and look at it and see if it works.
Well, what are you? Are you looking at it? So can you just tell us? Like Josh did ask you directly. Like, so what is the answer?
Well, it depends on what you mean by narratives. Because Josh, you will know because of your background that in Aaronist doesn't necessarily. I mean, there's different terms. Like, for example, some people think that God just zapped the people who are writing the text and they had to write down the exact phrasings, and then some will say, no, it's all true. But where it didn't stray from the doctrine, they're able to give their own perspectives and opinions, as long as
it's a discussion of inspiration. But I guess
Right,
my
you
point
understand
is,
that.
yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, it's probably more broad than this. So, for example, if it sounds like what you're saying is, well, Numbers 13 says this, you're connecting it to Deuteronomy 3, and you're saying, so these historical accounts, when the people went in and they spied out the land, these things happened. Because there's a difference between, let me say it a different way. In the flood account, there's justification given in the text, right, for why the flood came on the earth. The same is true in Atrahasis, right? There's justification given for why Enlil sent the flood and the rest of the gods sent the flood. What I'm saying is, if I were staying consistent in Atrahasis, I could say, no, Enlil's not justified by our standards in sending the flood, right? Because people making too much noise is not. But I'm operating within the world, within that system. And I guess I'm asking because it sounds like we're starting to mix a little bit here, because you've talked about historical events, right, of, recent history. And then we're moving into what you appear to be saying are historical events, in this, seemingly putting them in similar categories. And you may not be intending that. That's how it's coming across to me. That's why I'm asking the question.
Well, what I'm doing is, when you ask, why did God command to destroy these groups? You do it with at least a tacit disregard for the morality therein. So basically, you're saying that was wrong of God to do. Why would he do these things? And what I'm saying is, these specific people groups are different. As it says in the text, it lists all of them and says they come from the Nephilim that are part of the Anak. And then take another verse and comparison, like Deuteronomy chapter 34, where they go in and kill only the men in the city. And so what I'm saying is, you have to have a distinction and say, why did God say, make sure they're gone? So I don't know if you guys want to respond to that.
Well, I would first say we're not saying that's not the argument when we make against these things, that we think it's wrong.
Okay.
Our morality is completely irrelevant to the actual argument. What we're doing is
you've changed a lot, so I'm just asking. You've changed a lot since back.
But to be true I don't know how you're talking years and years ago. The argument I've been making for the last 2 years at least has been that talking about a contradiction in God's moral nature. So go ahead, Doc Justin.
Maybe it would be good for me to do the exercise that you suggested earlier.
Sure.
So, and maybe it would also push the conversation forward. So if you were to ask me, because I was a evangelical Christian for 25 years. So
sure.
If you want me to give the defense of God wiping out the Canaanites, from a Christian perspective, as I would have said it, would that be useful?
Well, I think that this is the correct way to do it, with exactly what the text says. And so, I mean, you could probably give a parallel account, but I don't think it would be consistent with Scripture.
I think that's what he's saying.
But yeah, you can.
Do. Well, okay. That's okay, dude. As a Christian, he's telling you, as a Christian, when he read the Bible, he's going to articulate.
Go ahead.
What it's not his personal view necessarily.
All right. Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I think if you had asked me this 12 years ago, let's say, I would say it sounds horrific, right? And these are difficult passages that we have to deal with. But we have an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God, one that knows things that we just can't know. And unfortunately, from our very limited, finite human perspective, there are things that God does that we can't. They seem immoral, but given who He is and His infinite nature, as an infinite being, as Job looked at the sufferings that he underwent. He didn't know what was going on in the spiritual realm, and so when we look at something like the Canaanites, we are given specific instances, specific rationales, in the same way that we're given rationale for the flood account. Men had become, for example, in Genesis 6, wickedness had become every thought, every deed that man did was wicked in his sight, and God had ostensibly been incredibly patient with mankind, at least for a period, before he wiped them out. And even in his mercy, he allowed 8 souls to be saved, and even those after leaving the ark fell right back into sinful ways. And so, mankind has a sin nature, and they have it from birth. I think it would be easy to argue that they have it in the womb.
Yeah, but Minister Josh, I'm a non-believer, and do you really think that God's appealing to God's mysterious nature justifies that?
Yeah, it doesn't feel good to you, I would say, and this is probably one of the reasons that volumes and volumes are written on this. It's one of the reasons that when you read Paul Copan's work, he takes time to say this doesn't feel good, right? But it's one of these things that at the end of the day, if we have faith, and this is one of the things that I think a lot of people miss in their Christian walk, is that they don't allow. Sorry, I read something silly in the side chat. I can't look at the side chat while I do this, and I didn't do it the whole time up until right then.
Sure. No, that's fine. We don't have to put on the charade anymore. You get where I'm coming from with that, right?
Well, number one, that was incredibly heartfelt from me, right? Because I think that is the Christian position. And honestly, that Christian position, I'm very happy with.
Okay.
That's, I think, the honest Christian position.
But to be fair, I would still poke a bunch of holes through, even though it's a very genuine and Josh.
You
I better believe.
You would, but I think what, and this is where I think we end up. Now it's me against Skyler. Come on, Skyler. No, but I think at the end of the day,
what I did there?
No, it's good. It's good. At the end of the day, this is why it sounds so problematic to the atheist. I think Converse, as you pointed out, that question of is this really satisfactory? And for many people, it's just not, to be able to say, like the skeptical theist does. Like we can't know, right? We don't have access to God's mind.
So maybe now it would be helpful for me to agree with you and say, yeah, it's not satisfactory to a skeptical mind. I agree. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to the specific text and find out, why would God do this? And why in other verses or texts will he go, and why would they only kill the men in a city? And then in certain ones like this, where it talks about their specific genealogical line back to Genesis chapter 6, does he command to wipe them off the earth? And then I ask, some of the atrocities that I mentioned earlier, obviously these people were even worse than that. Can I give you one? I'm not going to go into a big thing.
Let's just do the Amalekites, because that's the story that I always argue all the time. That's the one you hear most. Let's do the Amalekite story.
Yeah, but here's the thing. They're both mentioned here.
Well, I know, but let's stick with one. Let's stick with the Amalekite story, because that's the argument that I constantly use.
And Converse, I really do think that people know. People that are engaged in this conversation, they do know about the sin of the Canaanites. I'm sure there are a lot of people. Well, I hear G-Man and Jill talking about this stuff.
Okay, so people know, for example, that he raped his sister 77 times and he slept with his daughters.
Pause. Okay. I'm asking to do the Amalekite story. I don't know. I'm going to ask a third time.
Okay.
Let's do the Amalekite, because this is the argument I make. I don't actually talk about the Canaanites. Very, very little. Right. Actually, I don't even remember ever talking about the Canaanites really on this.
Right. That was just their God.
Sure. But let's look at the Amalekites. I think that's that's the argument I actually make against Christians. And that's what sparked this conversation, remember, because you were saying that I don't actually give an accurate representation of the story, that I'm not actually saying what Christians' beliefs are. So let's stick with the Amalekite story.
Okay.
What was the reason for the Amalekites?
So same thing, because they're both here in the text. It's because they were of the sons of Anak, which were part of the Nephilim, which goes back to Genesis chapter 6. Now, if you would look up Deuteronomy chapter 32, you'll find out in verse 7, it talks about the Tower of Babel there. A lot of people don't realize that it's even mentioned in another place. But it says, go and ask the elders. I think this was Moses telling somebody, he says, go and ask the elders, and they'll tell you about when the Most High separated the nations according to the number of the sons of God. Now, a lot of translations obscure that, and it says sons of Israel. That is not the correct definition or text there. It should say sons of God. And the reason for that is, number one, there weren't a tribe of Israel at that point at Babel. They weren't. He didn't even talk to Abraham until the next chapter. And then the second point is that they couldn't. This couldn't be sons of God. Like the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls read sons of God. So it says, go back and check it out. And then God allots the nations to these lesser gods, because he says at Babel, he goes, okay, you guys don't want to worship me? Then I'm going to separate you according to the number of these lesser beings, and you can worship them. And then he says, but my inheritance, my allotment is Jacob. So all along the way, he's telling the Israelites, look, these gods are horrible. At one point in the text, he says, if you were to go and follow these gods, even the most gentle woman amongst you would eat her baby. So he's saying, do not follow these gods no matter what. And then when he gets to this point, it obviously says that the Israelites were asked to destroy these people. And all I'm saying is, but when you take that and go, so you think, would you kill a baby today? I think that's facile, because it's not the same to say, would you kill a hybrid baby back then that is worshiping a raping God, to would you kill a baby today? I just don't think it's comparable.
Sure. So let me tell you, the problem with your whole argument here is that's not what actual 1 Samuel articulates as the reason why the Amalekites were wiped out. And I'm going to read it for you, because this is why I always read it to folks. It says, this is what the Lord Almighty says: I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid when they came out of Egypt. So he's not destroying Nephilim here. He's punishing them. It's a punishment. And this is generations later. This isn't even the same group of people who actually killed or hurt the Israelites when they were coming out of Egypt. You're going to a completely different chapter in the Bible, right? And this is, I think, what Dr. Josh was trying to allude to you here. You're going to a whole different chapter. Possibly, I'd imagine, a different time period within the Bible history. I had to go look a little bit more into the time frame in there. So you're saying, okay, so I'm sorry, it's the same time period with the Amalekites, and we're talking about the Nephilim in Genesis? So
Samuel, right, says that they went in to kill these Nephilim, right?
No, it doesn't say
it says they went in and killed these Amalekites, right?
It said because of what they did when they came out of Egypt, when they attacked Israel. It says nothing about Nephilim in this chapter. Okay.
So when this says that Moses sent spies in the land where these people lived to spy out the land and look at these, get a look at these people.
Give me the people verse again.
Numbers chapter 13, verses 27. And they came out to look at
27. Okay.
Right. And they came out to look at these people, and they say we look like grasshoppers compared to them. But basically they were saying, like we would say today, that guy was big as a house. Like they're saying these guys were huge, man. And so they were afraid to fight them. I mean, just think about Goliath. He was a Philistine, which is connected as well. If you look through the text, you'll find out that they're connected to the Raphaim. So what I'm pointing out is all of these groups are warring against the sons of Israel because of the seed of Christ. Their gods don't want the seed of Christ to come. So whenever the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they said, okay, now these people are free. So then they wanted to attack them. So while it may be true that they are being punished for what they did when they came out of Egypt, those two claims are not mutually exclusive.
So are you claiming that all of the Amalekites were Nephilim?
I'm claiming that all of the Amalekites that were killed were Nephilim.
Okay, well, they killed all of the Amalekites.
Yeah, but in another verse, it says that after the fact, it says that...
Wait, and how would you know that? Where would you get that scripture to say that the ones that were killed were Nephilim? Because that's not articulated in 1 Samuel.
So what it says is, it says, Amalek is living in the land of the Negev and the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and all.
You're in a different chapter. I'm in 1 Samuel. I'm actually in where it explains.
This isn't. Dr. Josh will tell you this isn't. The Bible's not in chronological order in that way.
Yeah, but we're talking about
Deuteronomy will jump back.
No, that's not. But what you're doing here, no. You're going to a whole different chapter, right? That's saying that. Let's say, let's read it. I'd rather read this for the whole audience because I really want them to understand. Numbers 13, 27 through 33 is, I think, is what you're getting at. They gave Moses this account. When we went to the land which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey, here it is fruit. Here is its fruits. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Enoch there. The Amalekites lived in Negev, the Hittites, just so they leave all the names, live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. The Caleb silenced the people before Moses said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can attack those people. They are stronger than we are, and they are spread among the Israelites a bad report, and the land they had explored. They said that the land explored devours the living in it. All the people we saw there are giant size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Enoch come from the Nephilim." See, well, hold up a minute. This isn't necessarily saying that all these groups of people are actually Nephilim. This is also just saying we also saw Nephilim in this area. And saying that people are large people doesn't mean they're giants. Like, you can go to certain tribes in Africa that are like 6'5", 6'7". They're big compared to people in China. They would consider those large people. These are all relative. But this isn't actually saying that all these groups of people were Nephilim. It's saying that there were also Nephilim there.
And
okay,
this is
so.
Go ahead, Josh, please.
I was going to say, this is why I was asking about the hermeneutical approach here, because this is actually a lot more, I think, complicated, even from an internal Christian perspective, evangelical Christian perspective.
Mm-hmm.
This is a lot more complicated than. So, for example, just thinking about why it is that they would reference the Nephilim, right? Why would they do that?
Right. Why would they do that?
Is it because these were Nephilim in the land? Is this a type of hyperbolic statement that's referencing a mythological topos? In other words, it's not quite as straightforward as I think the way that it's coming across to me as you're presenting it.
So if I could have a second to respond, and I just want to respond to both your comment and Skyler's comment, but I also want to preempt an argument because IP, who I really like, and we're going to be having a discussion on these topics soon, he points out in verse 31 that it says whenever they gave, or 32, they gave a bad report of the land. He was saying that they were lying about the people that were there. But it actually says, so they gave a bad report about the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land, though, which we have gone, devours the people, the inhabitants. So I just wanted to first clarify that because a lot of people like to think that that means they lied about the people. But it says they gave a bad report about the land, and then it qualifies what they mean. And it says the land devours people. So anyway, now
this
to get
might
to
be a good thing to
Skyler's
look
point.
up in Hebrew, Dr. Josh, if you got a second.
Well, Dr. Josh is familiar with Dr. Michael Heiser, which is where I got this from. He's an
Sure.
expert.
We'll take out the Hebrew on this too. I'd love to just see it.
Sorry, something. Sure. I was looking at the screen because something clicked weird in the stream.
Okay, so if I can respond to y'all's points though, because that was just a side note. So Skyler said this isn't actually calling them the Nephilim. So in verse 28 it says, the people who live there are very strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Then it lists them. Amalekites are living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and then the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of Jordan. And then in 33 it says, also there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak.
You say also there we saw?
Yeah, but keep
also
in mind,
there we saw, like also there we saw elephants. Also there we saw dogs. All those groups existed, but they also saw Nephilim.
All right, but look back at 28. It says, there we saw the descendants of Anak. and then it lists them. And then by 33, it says, we saw the Nephilim of the sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim.
Sorry, which verse is that? Go back. Which verse is it?
So 28 says, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Then it lists them in 29.
But the people who live there are powerful. No, so verse 28, but the people who live there are powerful and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there.
Right.
Okay, so this is obviously a huge area if you have all these civilizations living in this area, right? You could have a bunch of civilizations living there and you could have the Nephilim living there.
Okay,
this is the problem. And then when you go to, and this is the point, even when you go to 1 Samuel, it doesn't say that they were Nephilim. It says the reason they were killed was a whole different reason that you're trying to attribute to this. But go ahead.
Well, the Bible says
a lot of problems on top of each other. Yeah.
Okay. The Bible says use precepts. The Bible's not in chronological order. In fact, it's not even a book. It's a library.
That's not the issue.
That is the issue because Judges and Deuteronomy and all these, they tell the same story in different ways. So they tell the same time frame in a different, so they give different details. So this is given a different perspective on when they went into the land and saw these people who they ended up warring against. So if you look at 28, it says, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Then it lists them. And then it says, the sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. So it's saying that. No.
Hold on. See, I'm going to read it because I think what you're doing is you're kind of jumping over there by not reading the scripture here. Let me read it again. Verse 27. They gave Moses the account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's the fruit. Here's its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. So we saw descendants of Anak in this land. Then it goes into listing where the different groups of people live in this land. Then it goes into the Amalekites lived in this place. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites lived in the hill country. And then the Canaanites lived near the sea. So yes, it's saying in this land, we saw these groups, we even saw these descendants of the Anak. Then we saw this is where the Amalekites lived. This is where the other groups of people lived. It's just describing the land and where everybody lived.
So I know that we all have like certain biases, but let me just read this.
I'm reading it word for word, my man.
Okay.
There's no bias there.
Right, but there's a difference between exegesis and eisegesis. So it says, and moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Then it lists them. The Amalekites live in the land of the Negev. The Amorites live in the hill country.
Now read the full thing. You keep skipping. This is why it sounds weird.
I didn't skip one line.
I'll read it again for everybody. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land which you sent us to, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's its fruits. But now it's describing the people. But the people who live there and are powerful, and the cities are fortified very large. Okay, now here we saw descendants of Anak there. That's a period right there. Yep. The Amalekites, now it's not saying that these are the descendants of Anak. You have to connect.
Wait a second. So would you agree? Okay, so let's do this. Let's say that you're right. I'm just keep in mind though that I didn't make this up. Scholars have known this. But let's say
I'm gonna because I think that's an important point. So you've mentioned Michael Heiser. What other secondary literature have you read on this?
Well, let me just give you not only Michael Heiser, right? All of the texts surrounding the Israelites, all of their context, the book of Enoch, the book of Jasher, all of these all have the exact same story in it. You know, it has the same story about all this. So
it's not the same
and then
story.
Let's say, hold on, wait a second. Then let's say that you're right, that the great and strong people who are in the land, who are the descendants of Anak, are not these people that are listed in the next verse, right? Well, let's take one, for example, the Amorites, okay? When you flip over to Amos 2 and 9, it describes the Ammonites, and it says, they are tall as cedar trees. So you're saying that these
people are tall. I'm sorry, it doesn't make you a Nephilim just because you're tall.
I know, but you're saying these people that are sons of the descendants of Anak who are very large?
No. You're attributing this to all those cultures. And you haven't justified that. And I didn't hear an answer to your question from Josh about
what was the question?
About the secondary literature. Who are the people that you've read on it?
Wait a second. He said secondary literature, and I said that the secondary literature would be, for example, the book of.
Yeah, I'll be clear. I'll be clear. No, secondary literature has sort of a specific meaning. I mean,
let me get some water. Keep talking.
Yeah. Sure. So, like I've just been studying the book of Daniel probably more than I'll ever want to. But the secondary literature would be like the monographs, the peer-reviewed literature that's been written on this. That's what we refer to the site. So primary literature would be like Enoch would be a primary source.
That's what I gave Enoch.
No. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're saying that's a primary source.
Yeah, those are
You want a
primary
secondary
sources,
account.
the actual texts themselves. But then the people that are writing, the scholars that are writing on this in the peer-reviewed literature, that's we call that secondary literature. So
Sure.
So you've
Are you saying that you disagree with Heiser on these verses? Or?
I haven't I haven't studied this specific aspect of Deuteronomy in probably 7 years, and it would be unbelievably foolish for me to wade into it without reading through the text in Hebrew and then looking
so
at
maybe
the
I
secondary
could just
literature. But so that's why I'm asking you the question. So in Daniel, for example, if you were talking about Daniel chapter 9, or if you were talking about Daniel chapter 7 or whatever, I would say, what secondary literature have you read on this? And I would want to hear you say something like, okay, from a, if you're taking a conservative position, I've read Stephen Miller's commentary on this, or I've read this article by Stephen Anderson, and I would hope that you would also say that I've read Golden Gay, and I've read Collins, and I've read Jung Young Seau, and I've read all these other people. So like on this particular, it sounds like you've spent a lot of time with it.
Sure.
So that's what I'm asking.
If you've read, I honestly, what I typically do is I follow some scholars like Michael Heiser closely, and then I consult commentaries. Okay, so
like
that
who?
I have which commentaries? It depends on. So there's about 8 commentaries on this. I think Goldbach. Am I right about that? So I guess that
it's okay. You don't have to come up with their names.
I don't. No, that's fine. I think that the one that I usually look at is Goldman or Goldbach. But I don't remember off the top of my head.
That's
so
okay.
I will concede that point to you.
No. It's not a point to concede. Sorry, I'm not trying to. It's not a gotcha thing. I'm not trying to.
Because regardless of whether whose commentary it is, obviously, if the scholarship points to this being correct, or even here's my main point is listen. So there's been a time where a lot of scholarship, even in Christianity, did not take this view. But because of the translation errors, like with sons of Israel instead of sons of God in Deuteronomy chapter 32, that have been known from the Septuagint and from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay.
It's shedding light on these cases.
Sorry. I'm trying to think of where to go with that.
I would just point out that I have verses all the way from Genesis through all the Old Testament to the New Testament that all correspond. Look at Jude.
Okay.
Look at 2 Peter. You get it.
Pump the brakes for a sec. Okay. Sure. So couple of things. One, I just want to say I like Michael Heiser, right? I really do. Wisconsin-Madison, studied under Michael Fox. I think he's a good scholar. I really do. So I'd be interested to read what he says on this. My next question, so if I were to leave this room right now, right, and you said, Josh, you have an hour, I want you to figure out what you think about this. The first thing that I would do is go read the Hebrew, right? And the next thing that I would do, if you're asking me specifically about Michael Heiser, then I would, go read what Michael Heiser says about this. Then I would probably just go and read through one of the 9 Deuteronomy commentaries or numbers commentaries, whichever one we're talking about here, that I have on the shelf. And then I would go onto JSTOR and try to find reviews of the things that people have said about Michael Heiser's position, if Michael Heiser's position is different from the others, right? If he's contrasting.
I encourage that.
So no, I guess what. Right. So what I'm saying is his view different from mainstream scholarship? Because I don't know. I don't know what he says about this.
So if that's your answer, I would applaud that answer. I would applaud you and Skyler both by saying, well, we just we don't know enough about it yet, but we will definitely look at it and let you know what we find out about it. Sure. I love the answer. I'm not sure, because that shows that you're honest. It's the same thing I answered you before.
Sure.
It shows that you're honest, you're struggling with, you want to know. But what I would say, though, is about the text is I don't think there's much getting out of saying that we saw the descendants of some people there, and then it lists some people in the next verse, and then it ties them directly to this other people group, and by the end of the passage, and not only that, but that it makes sense that it makes sense that in other verses where they go into the land and they're not commanded to wipe out everybody, but only in these specific cases where these people groups are named, that is the case. I mean, it just stands to reason. It makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying it's a proof, but I mean, I think you guys can see where I'm coming from here. And I guess you could say, well, let us get back to you on, or something like that. And I definitely am fine with that answer.
I don't agree with your assumption here about this, but I have a more interesting question, right?
Sure.
Let's just say, let's grant you that they're Nephilim. What's wrong with Nephilim?
What's wrong with Nephilim?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, why are they worthy of being killed?
Well, they're worthy of being killed for, I mean, multiple reasons. One, because they're trying to, because they're opposing God. Two, because they're trying to wipe out the seed that comes to save the world, Christ. So they're warring with
Where does that say? Where is that in Scripture that I could see that they're against God?
They're against God's people because they're constantly warring with them. You just said they attacked them coming out of Egypt.
So
right?
you're saying literally every one of these groups, every person in those groups are all Nephilim. There's no humans among them.
I'm not saying that. I'm just reading the text where it says.
That's what I'm. No. That's okay. Listen, dude. I get it. Like when we say this, I'm talking about your beliefs about the Bible. Obviously, sure. I'm not referring to your personal opinion on something, right? So when I ask you, you're saying this. I'm meaning by your interpretation of the Bible, how your views are. Are you saying that none of these groups had any humans in them at all? The Amalekites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, all these people, non-human players.
Well, let me say two things. One, I'm willing to be shown to be wrong about this. And there are probably Christians that disagree with me on it, although I'm not sure how they would. But let's say that they are.
But that's the main point. Sorry, dude. I don't mean I feel like I keep jumping in, but like that's the main point. I'm not trying to hold your feet to the fire on like who the commentators are. And if you're saying you haven't looked at the secondary literature, that's also absolutely fine. But I mean,
well, I did give you a secondary source. You just asked for one more.
No,
and I didn't prepare for multiple sources. I figured you would accept Michael Heiser.
This isn't, I'm not trying to challenge you on this point. This is me saying, like, after we leave this hangout or whatever this is called, what I would hope you would want to do on this is say, I'm going to go read what other scholars say about this. Right? Now, this may be something, I'll be honest, like this may be something that I flip through the Hebrew and go, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then
I'd say you could do that, but do you agree with me, though, that Dr. Michael Heiser, who is not only has a PhD in ancient Semitic languages, but also that is the editor of Logos Bible Software, would know the Hebrew pretty well.
Of course.
In fact, I have
hold on. Okay, look, but don't play. Hey, trust me on this one. Don't go down that path. Okay.
What path?
The path that you just went down. If Michael Heiser, who trained under Michael Fox, would you say that everything that Michael Fox says is correct? I don't think that
everything
you would.
Michael Heiser says is correct.
Okay. So,
but I would say you were questioning the Hebrew,
no,
and I just said, wouldn't you think he would know the Hebrew as well?
This is just not the way you want to.
Appeal to authority is not always a fallacy.
Holy shit, dude! Converse, you got to let me talk, man. Like, for real.
Go ahead. I'm talking to two guys, though. You got to understand that as well.
Y'all have fun. No, go ahead.
No. I want to hear what you're saying.
I don't know that
I'm just responding to both of you guys.
Converse,
no, I do.
I don't know that you do, man.
I definitely do.
The thing is, Converse, when you came in here originally, you didn't want us to interrupt you, but you constantly have interrupted us throughout the show. And that's why I started interrupting back. And it's been a theme that has kind of gone on here. No, I mean, I'm just pointing out this is why it's gotten to where it's gotten at this point. We'll at this point,
I thought we were having a conversation.
Well, we are having a conversation, but you made this whole production of how wanting to speak to my audience about having a peaceful conversation, and you told me before we came on air about interrupting, and then hold on, see, you're looking one another good, right? And then you had to tell my audience how you didn't want to be interrupted, but then as soon as you came on, you started interrupting us. So it's like if you're wondering like why this is coming off a little bit more hostile and frustrating, it's because of that, right? And go ahead, now you can respond.
Feel free. I mean, I want to hear both of your thoughts. I mean, I wasn't trying to interrupt. It's just when he was trying to get his point out and you said that's an appeal to authority, I just thought I'd say, well, appeal to authority is not always a fallacy. So go ahead. I mean, I want to hear.
But you're using that as a justification for why you're right here.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying.
Okay, well then, you need to articulate why you're right then, instead of just appealing to this guy and saying this is what he believes, because that's all I've heard so far. This is what this guy thinks, these people are all Nephilim. Okay, that's great. He thinks they're all Nephilim. You need to make that argument, not just appeal to him and say that this is what.
Well, I didn't appeal to him originally. Originally, I was just reading from the text, and then whenever you guys challenged the Hebrew and you said, Josh, we may need to look into the language. I appealed to Josh's scholar. He knows this scholar. And he knows that he's the editor of Logos Bible Software and so forth. And then I said, don't you think that he knows the Hebrew as well and that he had thought about it? And I'll give you a resource real quick. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel called Sons of God, where there's a 6-hour discussion, lectures by Dr. Michael Heiser on this exact topic, where he runs through everything that I just gave you, plus way more. So if you want to get back with me on that.
Let me just ask a question. So, do you know who John Collins is?
John Collins?
Yeah.
The name rings a bell.
All right. So John Collins.
Is he at Dallas Theological Seminary?
No.
Okay.
John C. Collins might be, or I don't remember his.
Okay.
Yeah, it's different John Collins.
Okay.
John Collins works extensively in the Second Temple period. Wrote huge commentary on the book of Daniel. And I just put out 2 videos on the Aramaic and then the Hebrew, linguistic evidence for the dating of Daniel. And I laid it out according to John Collins's structure, right? Not the only scholar that I talked about, but I used his structure.
Sure.
And somebody made the comment, it was SJ, actually, she's made it a number of times, relies too heavily on one source. Now, I'm not actually going to push back on that, right? Because I remember making this and going, I wonder if people are going to think that the only person I'm citing is John Collins. I need to make sure that, I call attention to all of the other scholars. But because I laid it out according to his structure, she said, oh, he's just relying on John Collins. It's not true, but it's fine. I understand why it looks that way. I don't fault her for saying that, because if I were just reading John Collins, right? John Collins is a phenomenal scholar. And yet there are things that John Collins holds to, for example, that Carol Newsom in her 2014 commentary critiques, right? And there are things that Chung-Leung Seau says, on this particular thing, I'm not really sure that I agree with him on that. And these are all, Chung-Leung Seau wrote the grammar on Hebrew, not the grammar, but, one that's used very, very frequently.
Sure. I get your point.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is
using a single source.
Yeah, I know I'm not suggesting that you're doing that. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying that, like, in this case, because you may be 100% right about this, Converse, like 100% right. I think that it would be, to me, had you said, yeah, it's not, I know this might sound a little weird or whatever. It's not just Heiser that says it. Heiser's a really good scholar, but if you also look at so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, they all agree. This is sort of the mainstream position. Like me, I'm already taking seriously what you say, because I haven't read through this in 6-7 years, whatever it is. and even if I had recently, it's still, this is a very specific aspect of this particular discussion. So I take very seriously what you're saying, just like I take seriously anything that anybody says that I haven't studied quite yet. But those are the thoughts that are kind of rattling around in my mind. And
Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I've talked a lot.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were
good,
finished. I got a couple of points to make. So one, I want to appeal to your ancient Near East background. And I would say definitely check out the 6-hour lectures that I have with Michael Heiser going through all of the Bible. He doesn't just go through these verses. He goes through the entire Bible, and on my playlist, Sons of God. But what I want to appeal to is your Near Eastern background. Wouldn't you agree with me that this is a common story throughout all of the Near Eastern literature? These giant people who are from the sons of God. Take for example, the gods of Egypt, for example. If you have, they're standing way taller than everybody else, holding up normal people by their hair, and they're half the size or less of them, and they say, "I'm a son of God." Like Amun-Ra is the son of God, for example. Think about Ugaritic. Think about the epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is what we would call a Nephilim, in my opinion, because he is a giant person, and he. You get what I mean. That all of this is in the ancient Near Eastern literature.
So do you know? Oh, I'm not going to remember the name. Damn it. The Golden Bough. That's so terrible. Megan's going to shoot me. Wrote about sort of this cross-cultural anthropological look at all the different dying and rising gods. It's one of the things that he talked about. Why can't I remember his name? That's really awful. I apologize, Megan. There's just to speak to that particular point, like there are certain things that we don't ever want to get, in my opinion, we don't ever want to get away from trying to make connections cross-culturally, right? There's no question. We have to be careful about that sort of thing to not...
I agree.
Yeah, to not make the connections and then try to... Now, there's no question, I would say, there's no question if you're making connections to the Ugaritic text, for example, and there's specific connections, rider on the cloud imagery or something.
Right.
Yes, like absolutely. And I know that Michael Heiser talks a lot about that. So like I would have to I would want to hear about specific, like just the fact that, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are big doesn't,
right.
And they're born of a deity. I don't know that I would still consider that the B'nai Elohim motif.
Yeah. I mean, I see that's almost a direct parallel. I mean, but not just that one, but all of the I think they all have the Near Eastern religions all have the same story, that there was this flood and there was, reasons why mankind had been so corrupted. And there's these sons of God that were produced, and they were huge, giant people. Like, for example, Gilgamesh and Enkidu were giants, and that they were mighty men, and all throughout these different cultures, and like even the Canaanites, they had Baal and all of these different, even in Egypt. I mean, all of these stories have that. So I'm not saying that proves it, but what I'm saying is, if the text looks like it says this, and then, we have, and I'm just giving you some scholarship, sure. Like Michael Heiser. Now, I do need to get, maybe I should have included another source.
It's okay.
And now I'm appealing to your Near Eastern experience, that this is a theme that is in the literature, not just theirs, but their surrounding cultures, that they, like some of these they've directly been involved in, like Babylon and these other places where they've been in these places, and they see these same narrative. They come out of Egypt. They've got all these same narratives. That's my point.
Okay. So like, let's take one, for example, something specific. So the flood story, right? The flood story. I mean, I don't know that, there's anybody that I can think of that would, anybody in mainstream scholarship, let's say, that would argue that the Bible didn't take the flood story from the Mesopotamian flood story. Anyway.
Can I respond to that real quick? Or no, go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt.
No. So one of the things that I think is incredibly clear, but maybe most telling about, the biblical flood story is, and I've said this before, but the justification of the deity for committing the act, right? So, and I mentioned this, I think, earlier here. The flood is sent out. Destruction of humanity is called for by the gods and is affected because of seemingly arbitrary, probably even to the people. I would say almost certainly to the people reading the story, is capricious, right? They're being too loud. I don't like the noise, and I think Lambert tried to make
the justification.
Yeah, I mean, Lambert tried to make an argument one time that noise, like Rigmu, is maybe like sinful, and I don't find the argument terribly convincing. I don't think it's really had a lot of traction. But
you're saying that's what the Bible justifies it with?
No. That's what Atrahasis, for example, utilizes. Gotcha. So one of the things that the biblical text does explicitly is to say Yahweh is absolutely justified. In fact, it's almost as if he didn't do it, it would be bad, right? Mankind has become so wicked that he has to wipe them out. And I think that's one of the key differences between it's one of the things, the intertextuality and the change that takes place in the biblical text, and that distinguishes and speaks to what it is that the Hebrew writer was trying to get across. This story, this is different in our text because our God is justified in doing so. He's not a capricious deity, right? In this story. Mm-hmm. So I say all that to say, when you think about intertextuality like that, I agree with you. It's incredibly important to think about intertextuality and to see where is, the writer of Isaiah, where is the writer of Ezekiel, where is the writer of Daniel, whatever, pulling from, drawing on other ancient Near Eastern sources. Where is Exodus 21 pulling on the laws of Hammurabi? And if so, right, what is different? What is the same? Like those are important things. But it's also good, for example, like I don't see a connection between the Gilgamesh story, even though you have these seeming similarities. Like, all right, his mother and father, you got a father that's like a semi-divine king, or at least in some places divine, and his mother's Ninsun, and so he's two-thirds God. I don't see a connection there necessarily because it's a completely different context from a textual standpoint. So okay, go ahead.
So I've got a few points. I got like 3 points I want to respond to. So you brought up the flood and these shared memories, and your language. I don't know, maybe you didn't mean it, but your language that scholars say that the biblical writers took this from other cultures. Wouldn't it stand to reason that if the biblical writers who came out of other cultures and they all had a shared memory passed through oral tradition their story, and although there are differences, they eventually wrote it down? So, for example, we're from the United States, and we know about 9/11, for example. Now, everybody might have a different take, but let's say later on they find my children's children wrote about 9/11, and then there's earlier writings from a different culture, and then they go, well, they took it from them because obviously they knew it. And my children at this point's living in Brazil or somewhere, and they go, they took it from that culture. I don't think you didn't mean it that way, but that's the first point I want to make.
Yeah, you did? Definitely did. Yeah. And so this is probably way too much to talk about here, but just if you want some resources, you can read Alan Millard, for example, in his translation of Atrahasis. You can read Alan Lambert. But don't worry about remembering those now. You can, if you want some resources, you can email me. But no, it's actually that's a in some ways incredibly complicated argument, in some ways not incredibly complicated argument. No is what I would say. There's almost certainly direct borrowing from Atrahasis.
Right, but like if you lived in Babylon, for example, and or take for example the Canaanite Baal story. Baal was first called the rider on the cloud. Then you had Daniel attribute it to God, where he basically said, "No, your God's not." What he was basically saying is, "No, it's not your God that's right on the cloud; it's mine." So what I would say is, it's a shared memory that a later culture that they wrote down when they were separated. But the other points I wanted to make is, you're saying, well, I don't know if it's a direct correlation that some other cultures use this story about gods having children and they being giants, but just think about even the Greek gods, Hercules and all of these, Zeus and all this, and Thor, and that's almost in every culture there's these same exact stories. And then one more thing is, I think that if we look at all of the different cultures combined and the stories, and then we read what and you mentioned the flood as being a shared memory or being taken, right? It's interesting that the justification for the flood wasn't just that all the thoughts of humans' hearts were continuously evil all the time, but the chapter 6 is about the flood, and the first couple of verses specifically map out that it was the sons of God in those days had daughters by the with humans and bore great mighty men of renown. Then it goes into the story of the flood.
Certainly.
I would just say that it's not like I'm pulling this from somewhere and connecting it to the flood and then connecting it to here or there. I think you understand that I'm using precepts upon precepts to build a case the same way Dr. Michael Heiser and other people are doing. And you get where I'm coming from. I think you need to look at the material that I've seen. And I'll look at this Alan
Millard. That's just the first name that came to mind. He did a translation in
Lambert.
Yeah, Maurice Lambert has he died I think in 2014, but came out posthumously his Babylonian creation myths volume in the Mesopotamian civilization series. Yeah, just shoot me an email.
And the guy who trained Bart Ehrman.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Who trained Bart Ehrman?
Metzger, Bruce Metzger.
Metzger. I believe Metzger takes this position as well, so that might be a secondary resource for you. So.
It's funny. Now I remember what the other issue was that caused more problems by this story. I'm going to say these. Now we're at 10 o'clock, and we've got to end this because Josh got to 4 in the morning. I got to get up, and you can come on another time. We can continue the conversation. So there's two major problems as I see it with what was being argued here. One, God allowed angels to have sex with humans and reproduce, right? And then to solve the problem later, he has to have them go wipe out everybody, commit war and genocide, basically. I don't know why, we have to, God, this is what I'm talking about with God doing things backwards. Instead of just making it impossible for angels to reproduce with humans, and then now we have a bunch of Nephilim running around the earth causing problems and fighting his people, he could have just made it so they didn't reproduce. Because the whole goal, from what I've heard from many Christians, is that we have to get the bloodline to Jesus so that we could solve the problem. Jesus has to be born, and all these things have to happen in order for Jesus to be born. So you have a lot of problems with saying, I don't know why God's not controlling angels. I don't know. You have to argue whether they have free will or not. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But this is a problem very much solvable by God just by simply not allowing them to be able to have children together. Mm-hmm. But God obviously can see the future. He would know in the future that they're going to have children. And then he made them compatible. The second part of the problem is also the Nephilim. And I'll let you respond last, and then we'll end the show.
Sure.
Say your last word, say goodbye. The other problem is the Nephilim are mentioned in 6:4, then the flood happens in 6:9. So why didn't all the Nephilim die in the flood?
Well, it says in the text that there were Nephilim on the earth in those days and also afterwards. Now, there's been many speculations about why afterwards. And so there are 5 or 6 responses out there. I personally don't take a position because there's not enough evidence in the text to indicate exactly what it was. And what I try to do is be careful, so I'm safe with my whenever it comes to something like that. If there's not enough data there, I don't want to try and read it in because that'd be eisegesis. So what I do is I just say, one of those views could be correct, basically. But with your other question about and again, I wouldn't say, if I said it, I don't mean to. I wouldn't say these were fallen angels necessarily. Michael Heiser points out that they're not necessarily angels, the sons of God, because of the book of Job. Actually, the verses you guys were reading where God's saying, "Where were you when I laid the foundations?" If you look at that, like right after he says that, in the next verse, he says, "Where were you when the morning star," which is the term used for Satan in Isaiah 14, and I think it says the morning star and the sons of God were there or whatever. So I just wanted to point out that briefly, that this may not be angels per se, but rather
but they're not
council,
human.
the divine council. Yeah.
Okay,
So
not human. But God could still have the power to make sure that they don't impregnate humans, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I was about to answer is, so there's two things I want to respond with. One, I want to be clear that I don't want to try and speculate things that I don't know. So I would say, in the same way in science, when we don't know something, we don't want to do the God of the gaps and try to
I get it.
Okay, so I don't want to do the non-believer of the gaps or whatever and say, well, why would God? But what I would say is that I take the position right now, I could be convinced otherwise, of a Molinist. So I would say that God had a certain goal in mind, and he wanted to reach that goal. And because he knew of all of the possible worlds that could reach that goal, it so happens that this
is the best
world
possible world
is the
that
world that.
Okay.
And one more thing here.
You could always horrible. I'm sorry. I could spend a whole hour about how horrible that argument is. I mean,
we talked about it actually.
I mean, it's just basically so it was God's plan to have these, whatever these creatures are, whether they're angels, impregnate women, and then these creatures would live on earth and do sacrifice babies, do all these different awful things that are against God's own very nature. Because this is somehow the possible. And then he would make the Israelites have to go to war with these people, go fight wars, when God could literally snap and knock all these people out at once. But somehow that's the best possible world.
Now keep in mind, all right, so the other thing I was going to mention right before that was, keep in mind, when somebody limits their power by making someone free, okay, if you make somebody free, you have to then they're capable of things that they wouldn't otherwise be capable of. So, for example, if God were to make the perfect case where they wouldn't do anything outside of what he wants them to do, it's no different from determinism. It's no different from
it's just one aspect. Can you grow wings out of your back and fly?
Well,
does that mean you don't have free will?
No, because we talked about that actually last time. That's a common mistake. It's freedom of choice. What I mean by free will. So
there are certain choices that I don't have the ability to make in life. There are all types of people born with limitations to where they can't make certain choices. So taking away the ability, and that's not even a choice. Actually, no, I take it back. It doesn't even matter. It's not even a choice. You're just talking about taking the ability for these people to impregnate each other. So yes, they could still sleep with human people. There's the choice, but it doesn't. But you could take away the ability for them to be able to recreate other whatever creatures, Nephilims, these things are.
Right. So let's take away that ability. Now let's look at it. If you give humans free choice, it automatically shows that they have a choice between two things. Now, if you only give them the right thing to do as a choice, there's no difference than determinism.
That has nothing to do with it. It's about the ability for you to impregnate somebody.
I know. I'm saying the angels could still
sleep. No, but that's the issue here. That's the issue I'm making. I'm not making an issue about something else. My issue is that God gave the ability for whatever these things are, angels, whatever you're claiming they are, to be able to reproduce with human beings. Why would you? And you know what's going to go. So why would he give them that ability? And then your answer is best possible worlds.
No, my answer was, let's say that wasn't what the text said. It said any other evil that you can think of, any other bad that you can think of. If you give them a free choice, there has to be the good and the bad. And then, so in this case, the bad was if you eat from the tree before, God gives you that knowledge, then, this will happen.
We gotta stop now because we're way past, and this is not even at all on topic of what we're doing. All right. Thank you, my man. It's 10:10. It's really, I just feel more bad for Josh. I'm not really trying to cut you out. He's going to be up at 4 in the fucking morning. I have to be up at 6, which is rough, but not as rough as him. Thank you for coming on, man. We'll come back on another time or have us on your channel, whatever. We'll come on and talk. We appreciate you. You've been a fun person to have to talk with. We'll say goodbye. You have a good night, my man.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good one. So, guys, thank you so much for watching today. We had 170 people watching the show.
Jesus.
It was crazy. Guys, you guys are amazing.
I love our audience.
I do. I love you guys. You guys are so awesome. Hit the thumbs up button if you want to show us a little love. Share it out. Tell us what you like, what you didn't like. And we got another guest tomorrow, so we hope you guys come back and enjoy.
What day is it?
So today is Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Tomorrow's Thursday. I know. You lost the day. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Until next time, please subscribe and make the world a better place under his claws.
Don't wanna complicate ya.